Okay, so with the idea of putting the concept of global education into a specific context, Julius has asked me to talk a little bit about Zimbabwe. And I hope to be able to give you some overview of what Humana People does in Zimbabwe, a bit of what the context in Zimbabwe is in general and in the education sector more specifically, as well as talk about the two main educational, well, formal educational projects that we have in Zimbabwe. And then I will finish with a short video that is filmed in one of these schools that I will talk about, and that actually features Memory, who's the headmaster and who was initially going to come and give this presentation, but due to some personal issues, you get me instead. So I will do my best to fill in for Memory. So just to start off of explaining, who I am and how I relate to Julius and to Patrick, I will just briefly mention that Humana People is a network of NGOs, 32 NGOs working in development cooperation, as you can see, throughout the world. And the movement of Humana People was born in the late 60s and 70s as an anti-apartheid, anti-colonialism movement. So initially it was some volunteers from Scandinavian countries that began fundraising and so actively supporting and calling for support of development cooperation and anti-apartheid fight in the Southern Africa countries. So it began as that, and then it developed into raising of funds through other mechanisms, which is why now Humana is known in Europe for their clothes. So through the collection, sorting, and sales of clothes, certain funds are produced, and the surplus of those funds is dedicated to fund our projects in the south that we call. So actually, Zimbabwe is one of the first countries that Humana People began to work in. Zimbabwe was one of the sort of latest countries to gain independence from the UK. This was in 1980, and the Federation of Humana People is still headquartered in Zimbabwe, in Mshamba. After, when the work began in Zimbabwe and then, spread into other development projects in Botswana, in Mozambique, Angola, Malawi, Zambia, and then South Africa, later as well DRC, and then now we also work in Guinea-Bissau. Also later, using the experience and expertise that we had gained from the projects and adapting it to the context and the different settings and challenges of other countries, we also began to have some smaller projects in Belize, in Ecuador and Brazil, as well as China, Laos and India. So that gives a bit of a sort of overview of what we do in a wider context. And how I fit in is, so there is a Humana Spain, but actually the organization that I represent is the Federation, and that links all the work that we do in the south and in the north. And apart from the headquarters in Zimbabwe, there is an office in Europe, in Spain, where we represent the work that our colleagues do in the south, and we provide visibility to our projects and represent their work when we're not able to get Patrick back here that often. So just to move on to Zimbabwe, I mentioned that Zimbabwe was the first country where Humana People began to work through some volunteers and with the support of the Zimbabwean people, and then that led to the establishment of an organization called DAP, which stands for Development Aid from People to People. So actually the work initially started like that in Zimbabwe, in a similar way in Malawi. So Patrick works for DAP Malawi. And then, the federation actually and the idea of joining efforts in a formal manner came later. So hence the difference in names in the organization. So the mission in Zimbabwe was to work with the people of Zimbabwe with the aim of creating development in its broadest sense through the implementation of quality projects and through the empowerment of people with knowledge, skills, and tools to improve their living. And following from that, that willingness, we began to work in several areas, which can be grouped in four. Education I will go into later, so we have our agricultural food security and rural development programs, our HIV and AIDS programs, and child aid, which is holistic and comprehensive community development programs. And I think an important thing to highlight of the work that Humana People does is that we, and that is key to the sort of long-term impact and sustainability, is that we work by empowering the communities themselves, and we work by training the people in those villages and making them part of these projects and teaching them, so that that it's Patrick from his region in Malavio is trained and then works with schools in the area where he's from. So you're creating development through the people that are there, not by sort of bringing people, some volunteers or some work for certain years and then leaving and the whole project is sort of finished. So that's how we have gained the sustainability, and we have people in our organization in Zimbabwe that have actually been working there since it was established, since 1980. And the areas that we focus in most reflect the needs and the challenges of the country. So one is agriculture. I will go into explaining later that agriculture is a very important sector for Zimbabwe and has traditionally been. And then HIV/AIDS. Zimbabwe has been one of the countries that has been most affected by the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and there's still a lot of work to do, which we're still continuing, and now also as well with tuberculosis, which is also quite a deadly disease due to infection rates. And as I mentioned before, Child Aid is a comprehensive community development program that aims at bringing families together from villages to join their efforts, training key people that will then be the leaders or certain actions in a wide range of fields, ranging from linking up to schools to get them involved, and running health and sanitation campaigns, doing small agricultural projects, and so on. And in our work, in terms of our work in education in Zimbabwe, I think we can highlight mainly three institutions, two of which I will cover on later. So it's the Ponasaivanhu Technical College and the Junior School. Then there's also Frontline Institute, which is an institution that was created by Humana People to train the staff and to develop their capacity, so that there's an idea that once people have successfully implemented a project, they can be trained to gain skills and then actually move up the ladder. So we have people, for example, that started by doing field work in a child aid project and now have moved on to having more management responsibilities of other field staff, so that they continue with our work and have actually been key to also replicating projects in neighboring countries using the expertise that they have gained. And I will specifically talk about the technical colleges and the junior school later. So I don't know if there are any questions at this stage, or I will just go into the context of Zimbabwe. Yeah. Okay. So just some general facts about Zimbabwe. You'll see there that it's in the Southern Africa region. It's a landlocked country, like Malawi, and Patrick will later explain, with a population of over 12 million and 52% are female. It gained independence from Great Britain only in 1980, which is quite late considering the sort of independence wave across Africa began in 1960-something. It's a country with a great endowment in natural resources, and as it says there, gold, diamonds, copper, gold, and a great potential in the production of diamonds. And it is also a country with good agronomic and agricultural conditions. It's got a subtropical climate, and the country is located between two main river basins. So it has traditionally had a great potential for agricultural development, agricultural production, and of product. So as I was saying then, Zimbabwe is an agro-based economy, and the major crops are maize, tobacco, cotton, and these are exported, but yet Zimbabwe still imports quite a lot of staple food. It's a complicated issue to go into detail now, but it has a lot to do with the colonial heritage that the country has, and that during colonial times the British controlled quite a lot of portion of the land, and that actually it was quite successful in terms of producing goods, but not so much in terms of training the native population in doing the job themselves. So after independence and after the land redistribution policy took place, people were provided land, but not necessarily inputs or skills or capital necessary to develop that land. So it actually led to a steady decline in the production of agricultural products, and decrease in food security, which still affects the country to a certain extent. Zimbabweans will always proudly tell you that they used to be the breadbasket of Africa, and that they would produce so much that they would export to Zambia, Malawi, and Mozambique and South Africa. And Humana has been doing a lot of work trying to get farmers to work together and produce the land that they now have for something that will be more than just subsistence agriculture, so they actually can sell, earn an income, and develop their economy and their families. So just in general terms, more development facts about Zimbabwe that I will put into the context of the Millennium Development Goals after this. I mentioned, without really putting them into the objectives of MDGs, the data doesn't say much, but there are some statistics that will come about later, so that still demonstrate that the country has very many development challenges, and so you will see things that are quite unique to Zimbabwe, which is that the net enrollment rate in primary school is actually quite high. It's at 87%. And I will go into explaining that. HIV/AIDS epidemic still continues to affect 5.5% of youth, which is quite high. Maternal mortality rate is very high. Orphanhood is very high. Infant mortality rate is very high. And you'll see that the ratio of girls to boys in secondary school is actually quite fair, but then when it comes to female representation at the political level, it's actually quite unequal. So Julius was mentioning earlier on the development cooperation challenges and how that is approached from European and international level. And we know that at the moment, progress against development is being measured by the Millennium Development Goals. And that will last until 2015, which is when the goals are supposed to be achieved. Actually, in the process now is that the countries and the UN is trying to agree what will be the next set of goals or objectives that the countries will have, and what the new paradigm of development will be. And that is currently being discussed, and there have been some recommendations being put forward to the UN. And it is expected that in September, when there's the General Assembly, this will be one of the issues that will be discussed. But in terms of the progress against current MDGs, I thought it was important to highlight at least the progress for Zimbabwe against Millennium Development Goal 1, which relates to the reduction of poverty. And then the one about Millennium Development Goal 2 on education. So you'll see that the situation has been quite challenging for Zimbabwe, and in fact it is quite unlikely that Zimbabwe will meet MDG 1 by 2015. And actually MDG 1 is a very important one because it kind of lays the basis for everything else. So although the country might be making some progress in targeting the HIV/AIDS and epidemic, if poverty actually, as you can see there, remains so low, and human development index has actually decreased from 2015 to 2009. And then the population living below the total consumption poverty line, again, hasn't really progressed that much. It kind of provides an overview of the difficult context that the country is in. On the other hand, with regards to MDG 2, that aims to ensure that Zimbabwean children will be able to complete full primary education, you can see that actually Zimbabwe is doing quite well. And this is partly due to the policy that was implemented after 1980 independence. So up to 1980, education had been very restrictive, and the education that had been provided by the government and the colonial time was mainly aimed at the white colonials living there, and the native Africans had received a very limited education through missionary schools, but still with the aim of being then employed in the institutions and the industries that the colonials owned. And then after independence in 1980, the Zimbabwean government decided that education, and I guess it was a bit of a socialist influence, and they decided that education should be free for everyone and that everyone should have access to education. And that actually brought some really good results that have resulted in high literacy rates, which I will go on to explain. And you can see here literacy rates of 15 to 24-year-olds are actually 99.6 for both males and females, which is very high and sometimes quite unexpected. When you think of Africa, you think that actually literacy tends to be an issue, and in the case of Zimbabwe, this is not so much the case. And so the programs and the infrastructure, as well as funds that the government provided, had a very positive impact. At the same time, they also created, as you would expect, a very high budget that needed to be committed for education, which couldn't be continued for a very long time due to some political circumstances and difficulties during the early 2000s. So at the moment so how that kind of reflects now is you can see that although the literacy rate is quite high, the proportion of completion rates have not improved so much. So there was a dramatic decrease from 1996, 82% to 68.2 in 2006. So what happened actually was that a lot of the schools, a lot of the teachers, etc., were not getting paid. There was very limited resources in terms of infrastructure and salaries and books and other materials, and that led to a lot of students dropping out, because I think by that time education was a right to everyone, but it includes some fees and some levies which students couldn't cover, and that also links up to the fact that there wasn't actually any program to bring those back that had dropped out back into the system. There now is, and I will talk about it. But actually, that explains why the literacy rates are high, but if you look at the completion and the dropout, it also not as hasn't progressed as much. I won't go into the details of the other ones, or maybe just to give you a brief overview. Yeah, I mean, one of the areas where Zimbabwe is faring particularly bad has been maternal health. And also this has a wider impact on many of the other MDGs, because there's there's a really high maternal mortality rate because there's many of the birth rates are not attended by personnel that are skilled. There's actually very little antenatal care, so not, the women, the pregnant women, are not very much looked after before they give birth, and this doesn't really give solutions to any of the difficulties that may arise during pregnancy. There's also not very high contraceptive prevalence rates, and there is an unmet need for family planning, and that tends to go into religious issues that actually don't really advocate for family planning in Zimbabwe. So, just to go back to education more specifically, and then our programs, I mentioned that education became a basic right and ratified by the Constitution in 1980 with independence, and that it has one of the highest literacy rates in Africa at 92%. And the important thing is not just the statistics, but actually the fact that variations across population subgroups in terms of urban, rural, age groups and so on are quite small. And also that there's hardly any difference between male and females, and then that compares quite differently in the case of Malavio, which Patrick will talk about later. And I already mentioned about the net enrollment rate. So as I started saying, the introduction of free education in primary schools in the 1980s was a very successful tool to get people into the education system, but again it created a heavy budget for education. It coincided with the structural adjustment programs introduced by the World Bank. It then went on to coincide with the support from Zimbabwe to war in Congo, and a lot of money was printed from the government to cover those expenses, and it led to hyperinflation, and then that meant that people couldn't cover the costs of living, and people couldn't cover the costs of education. So that led to quite dropout rates. So if you can see here, actually some of the toughest years in Zimbabwe were around 2008, 2009. So you can see that the majority of the drop in the completion rate is around that area. It is more stable now, but there are still some challenges. And there were some programs like the Education Transition Fund that were introduced, funded by international donors, such as UNICEF and UK government and the Dutch government. And then there was a second leg of this Education Transition Fund, which aimed at trying to sustain the high levels of education and literacy rates there were in Zimbabwe, and trying to provide aid to confront some of the challenges and the lack of funding that there was. So, for example, the textbook pupil ratio had become very low, and is now almost one to one. Then there was also training school development committees and providing technical assistance to the ministry to monitor the educational systems and attainment. Other challenges that remained at the moment, rather than just what happened in 2008, 2009, is there's still quite a lot of budgetary constraints from the government in terms of resources, and there's quite a lot of infrastructure and was made available at time, and there's a lot of teachers employed, so actually paying the teachers itself takes up the majority of the budget that exists for education and allows for a very limited provision of other kind of support. Lack of infrastructure and access to electricity, so the buildings might be there, but the state in which they are, or the furniture that they might have, and the facilities are quite limited, and access to electricity is also an issue in Zimbabwe as a country as a whole. As I mentioned, although education was considered free for everyone and a right to everyone, there are some school fees that parents have to cover in government schools, and there's the school fees and the exam fees as well as travel. So actually, this also has this is part of the sort of budgetary constraints at a family level. There have been some new supporting programs trying to to bring up the support for vulnerable populations. So, for example, the Basic Education Assistance module particularly aims at supporting orphan and vulnerable children. I mentioned that the HIV/AIDS epidemic is one of the major development challenges that Zimbabwe has faced, and the consequences of this is that there is a large number of orphan and vulnerable children. So, of course, if there are some fees to pay for school, these tend to be the populations that are most likely to drop out or not attend. So there are some sort of safety network programs that have been developed, but they're still quite limited. Same for the Performance Like Address program, which actually is aimed at the people that I mentioned dropped out of school and now, you know, are out of level with their year. So this is a program that aims at bringing them back into the educational system and bringing them up to level with their year in 3 years. And it's proven quite successful, but it is still limited. Another thing that it is always highlighted is actually the lack of current data for Zimbabwe, which hinders the planning capacity and on up-to-date figures and data that do not exist. And just in terms of what the academic calendar is like, the system is still, and I mean, Patrick will cover a bit of Malawi, but it's the Zimbabwe system is also based on the UK system of education that was at the time, so it's still similar. I think it's the same years in Malawi, isn't it? In terms of 8 primary and 6 of secondary.
8 years in primary school and 4 years in secondary, so there is a 2-year difference.
Okay. But you do also have O levels and A levels,
yeah,
in that
especially those that are taking that side, then they follow.
Yeah. And yeah, just to sort of explain that the academic year runs from January to December. And then the aims of education, and this I am bringing to you from my colleague Memory, who is you will see later, she's the headmaster of the Panisai Technical College. So when asked about the aims of education in Zimbabwe, she said she summarized this in 6. So the first one is to decide to create thoughtful and responsible citizens. So the education system is responsible for producing individuals who will be part of a larger community and need skills and more to exist and coexist with the people. To gain self-esteem and confidence, which is a response to the global needs and demands. So it's expected as an educator to build a character that will uphold this way of being in students. And then to learn how to learn, it has to do with the fact that you must teach students how to learn once they leave school and to have their own capacity to find resources, to develop ideas and find answers to questions that may arise. To just teach students how to live, so it is the education that seeks to be provided is holistic, so the students don't learn just information but also life lessons. They participate in extracurricular activities that will make them all-round person. Knowledge to get by, so knowledge that will go further than what is needed at school level, but in terms of day-to-day life and that has funded basis on arithmetic and school subjects. And then finally, lifelong skills and habits that's focused on the future life, so that they need to be able to have other skills, as you know, working on time, dressing, behaving properly, so that they know how to behave when they get to other levels of their or other stages of their lives. So in terms of the Zimbabwean general context, that's the sort of overview that I wanted to provide. And now I wanted to talk a little bit about the educational projects that we have in Zimbabwe. So Patrick will explain later that he's a primary school teacher and that has been trained by Humana as a teacher training college, and that's one of the main lines of work that Humana does in other countries, but actually that's not the case in Zimbabwe. And because our projects are always trying to address the needs and the context of the countries, And I mentioned that the Zimbabwe has sufficiently high literacy rates and people are educated, yet they very often lack the sort of technical knowledge and skills to then find their own livelihood and find a job. So actually one of our main educational programs is the Ponisai Technical College that actually provides vocational training and education to students, and then the junior school Ponisai actually aimed at the other set of vulnerable populations that I've mentioned already, such as orphan, vulnerable children and others from difficult settings, that provides a safe environment for them to learn and to live. So, as I mentioned, this is one of the first schools that VšI Humana started in 1981 to provide vocational training to youth. I think there very often is a desire in some developing countries to be enrolled in formal education and to then go to university, but actually at the end of the day they very often lack these skills that are the ones that will be able to provide them with a living and a job in a day-to-day. So this was the focus of the technical college, was to provide technical skills and also to be, as part of the training that Humana always provides, is that we don't just focus on the skills but also on developing the person as a leader of the community, that they will then have skills and interpersonal skills when they go out to the community, so they won't just have a job but they'll aim at creating change in that community. So far more than 5,000 students have graduated. And as I mentioned, it's funded by Humana People, but students do contribute with about 20% of the fees. And it is recognized by the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, and so the pre-enrollment requisites and the curricula is agreed with the ministry, and the final degrees is recognized also. So we have these kind of sketches in Humana where we try to depict the work that we do in the context that we do it. So as we like to see that the school is not, separate from the rest of the community or the rest of the sector. So the school is very much, in the middle of everything, and it doesn't just provide the training in mechanic or agriculture or business studies. It also seeks at providing a more round person with general knowledge, culture, the students board at the school. So that's also a very important element, because they come to know that they have to play a role in the life of the school, and that they don't just, if they then become teachers or students, that they have to engage with the institution that they're at, and they have to contribute with daily tasks. And then there's community activities that then the students then try to use their knowledge and share their knowledge with the surrounding communities. And then the idea is that after this training has happened at Ponisai, but also in the community, then the students are able to gain employment in agriculture and industry or self-employment. And you will see when I show the video later, the students expressing their willingness and what they aim to do and to achieve with this education. So at the moment, there's two main departments that are registered under the ministry, and that's the business studies department and motor mechanics. And other short courses are offered, as you will see in the video. So I mentioned that the courses follow the national syllabus in terms of requirements, credits and hours. So for example, a business studies module of computer application, the government says it needs to require 200 hours, 40% theory, 60% practical. So this is then followed in the school. And just in case you were curious, to then be part of to become enrolled in the school, there are two intakes in January and April, and there's interviews that are conducted and so on, and there are requirements that the students need to fulfill in terms of primary and secondary education to access school. So I mentioned O-levels before, which is a secondary education completion diploma, so to say. And finally, the Planisai Vanho Junior School is very closely linked to the technical school, but I mentioned it's a boarding school that provides a safe environment for youth that are aged 12 to 18 from troubled backgrounds. So for this, Humana and our partner organization TAP work closely with the Department of Social Welfare, foster homes, police, etc., that refer these, these potential boarders at the school to DAP. And then students live in the school, and then they're supported through the provision of like a safe environment, counseling, attention, etc., extracurricular activities, social clubs, and this is funded by Humana People to People, and they don't pay for anything.